The truth about desire is deeply misunderstood in our modern world. A man is taught to be an open book, entirely transparent and always available. He gives away his mystery, hoping it builds trust, but instead, it creates terrible boredom. Robert Greene warns about this exact trap in his writings about power and seduction. Total presence kills the imagination. When a man is too predictable, the space required for longing completely vanishes from the picture. She stops wondering about him, because there is absolutely nothing left to wonder about anymore. To understand this phenomenon, we must look at the unseen mechanics of human behavior. A quiet shift in perspective is required. Most guys think affection builds a deep connection, but they confuse comfort with actual burning desire. The realm of dark psychology teaches us that desire is inherently linked to the unknown, not the familiar. A man who reveals every single thought strips away the tension that keeps a mind engaged. It is like watching a movie where the ending is ruined within the very first 5 minutes of playing. This is where the concept of emotional obsession truly begins to take root. It is not about manipulation, but about understanding natural biological drives. A mind is always seeking a puzzle to solve, something to chase and eventually conquer. When a man creates a slight sense of unpredictability, he forces the brain to pay close attention to him. He is no longer a background character in her daily routine. He becomes a vivid question mark, and the human brain simply cannot rest until a compelling question is fully answered. The classic flaw in male psychology is the assumption that more effort automatically equals more reward. This makes logical sense, but attraction defies pure logic. A guy will text back immediately, drop his plans, and orbit around a romantic interest, believing this proves his undeniable value. Sadly, this behavior actually signals a complete lack of personal boundaries and purpose. When his entire world revolves around external validation, his inherent value drops tremendously. A man must realize that his time and attention are his absolute most valuable, non-renewable currencies in life. Here is where the forbidden layer begins. A layer that almost no content in this space will touch because it is too uncomfortable, too provocative, and too devastatingly true to be packaged conveniently. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the architecture of the human psyche, and what he discovered about attraction has been buried beneath a mountain of polite modern psychology. He identified what he called the shadow, the part of a man's personality that exists beneath the carefully constructed social surface, the parts he was taught to hide. The darkness, the aggression, the moral ambiguity, the capacity for danger, the parts he suppresses because civilization demanded their suppression. Here is the forbidden truth. A woman's deep unconscious is not drawn to the sanitized, socially approved version of a man. It is drawn toward the man who has genuinely integrated his shadow. Not a man who performs darkness as an aesthetic. Not a man who is simply cruel or reckless, but a man who contains his darkness rather than being controlled by it. A man whose composure hints that something more powerful lies beneath the surface, disciplined but present. This is why a man who has never confronted his own capacity for anger, for dominance, for primal intensity, always feels slightly weightless to a woman's nervous system. She cannot feel the depth because there is no depth beneath the performance of niceness. The integrated man is different. He has made peace with every part of his nature, the gentle and the fierce, the warm and the cold, the patient and the relentless. That totality is what creates genuine psychological gravity. She senses that this man contains multitudes, and multitudes cannot be fully known, and what cannot be fully known cannot be taken for granted. The practical implication of Jung's shadow integration is this: stop editing yourself for social approval. Stop eliminating the sharpness from your opinions. Stop softening the edges of your humor. Stop apologizing for the parts of you that make comfortable people uncomfortable. A man who has genuinely integrated his shadow does not perform menace, but he does not perform harmlessness either. He simply is what he is, fully, without apology. And that completeness is the rarest and most compelling quality a man can possess in a world of hollow, approval-seeking behavior. Real personal development is not just about reading books or hitting the gym. It is about cultivating an internal life that is rich and unshakable. A man with a genuine mission does not have the capacity to respond to every message within seconds. His delay is not a cheap tactic. It is the natural byproduct of a life moving forward. This creates a powerful shift in social dynamics. He goes from being the pursuer to being the prize. Instinctively, people place much higher value on things that are harder to obtain. But there is a deeper trap that most men fall into that sits just beneath the surface of this understanding. And it is almost never discussed because naming it requires a man to be brutally honest with himself. It is called the covert contract, and it is destroying more men's interactions than any lack of strategy ever could. A covert contract is an unspoken agreement that a man makes with himself about an interaction, one that the other person has never agreed to and is never told about. He does the nice things, the generous things, the attentive things. He shows up consistently, remembers details, makes effort visible. And beneath all of it runs a silent assumption. Because I am doing all of this, she will eventually respond with the desire I want. He has written a contract. He has signed it. He is faithfully fulfilling his side. But she never signed it. She does not even know it exists. And when she fails to fulfill her side of the contract she never agreed to, he feels a betrayal that confuses and eventually embitters him. His effort begins to feel like a transaction. She can feel the transactional energy beneath the surface, even if she cannot name it. And transactional energy is the fastest way to kill genuine desire that exists in human psychology. The dark truth is this: any act of generosity, attention, or warmth that carries a hidden expectation of romantic return is not generosity. It is a strategy dressed as a virtue. And her nervous system knows the difference even when her conscious mind does not. The man who gives freely, with no expectation of specific return, because giving is an expression of his own abundance and character, that man is rare beyond words. And rarity, as Cialdini's research on scarcity conclusively showed, is the most primal driver of perceived value in human psychology. Dissolve the covert contract. Give without agenda. Withdraw without punishment. Engage because you choose to, not because you expect a specific return. That shift from transaction to genuine expression changes the entire quality of a man's presence in ways that no technique can replicate. One of the most potent attraction triggers is the strategic withdrawal of attention. It sounds counterintuitive, yet it works with ruthless efficiency. When a man slightly pulls back, he activates a primal fear of loss within the other person. She begins to invest mental energy trying to figure out what changed, which essentially builds her investment in him. This mental effort is the soil where true fascination grows. Without this space, the relationship suffocates under the weight of constant, overwhelming reassurance. A subtle distance allows the anticipation to breathe again. Possessing real emotional intelligence means knowing exactly when to step forward and when to step back. It is a delicate dance of presence and absence. A guy might fear that stepping back will make her lose interest entirely, but the exact opposite is true. By retreating just a fraction, he gives her the gift of missing him. He allows her to experience the longing that precedes every great reunion. This is how a man protects his peace while simultaneously keeping the emotional stakes high enough to be profoundly interesting. True depth is never built on a foundation of constant availability and endless chatter. A deep connection requires moments of profound silence and reflection. Think of it like music. Without the pauses between the notes, there is no melody, just continuous noise. A man who understands this principle speaks less, but says much more. When he finally does give his attention, it feels incredibly intense and incredibly rewarding. Here is a layer of forbidden knowledge that the self-help industry will never sell you, because it dismantles the comfortable narrative that healthy connection is always built on safety and predictability. In 2010, researchers studying attachment theory at the University of Denver confirmed something that practitioners of behavioral psychology had observed for decades. The most powerful emotional bonds between human beings are not formed under conditions of comfort. They are formed under conditions of alternating comfort and mild distress. The oscillation between the two, the warmth followed by the withdrawal, followed by the warmth returning, creates a neurological bonding pattern that is significantly more durable and more consuming than bonds formed under consistent positive conditions. This is why the man who is always warm, always present, always reliable, creates affection, but rarely obsession. Affection is calm, obsession is restless. And obsession is what drives the kind of relentless mental investment that keeps a woman returning to a man's orbit long after logic suggests she should move on. The mechanism behind this is the interplay of cortisol and oxytocin in the brain. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. In normal, comfortable relationships, oxytocin flows steadily at a moderate level. In relationships characterized by intermittent emotional intensity, the slight withdrawal, followed by the warm return cortisol spikes during the withdrawal, and then oxytocin surges dramatically when the warmth returns. That cortisol to oxytocin transition is neurologically addictive in a way that pure, consistent oxytocin never is. She is not just happy when he re-engages after a period of distance. She is flooded. The return of his warmth after the absence feels like relief at a biological level. And relief bonded to a specific person is one of the most powerful attachment mechanisms the human brain possesses. The man does not engineer this cycle manipulatively. He simply lives a full, genuinely engaged life in which his attention naturally ebbs and flows because his world is larger than any single person in it. But the neurological effect of that natural ebb and flow on her bonding system is profound. And most men, by being constantly available, unknowingly prevent that mechanism from ever activating. In the landscape of seduction psychology, there is a concept called reward prediction error, which perfectly explains the dopamine dynamic. The brain releases the most dopamine not when it receives a guaranteed reward, but when the reward is highly unexpected. If a man is always sweet and always present, the dopamine baseline simply flatlines. But if his warmth is slightly unpredictable, the brain spikes with chemical excitement every single time he engages. He wires her nervous system to crave his validation because it is no longer a cheap, given commodity. But deeper than reward prediction error sits a psychological principle that the Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik documented in the 1920s. She discovered that the human brain assigns disproportionate cognitive resources to unfinished tasks, unresolved situations, and incomplete patterns. The brain needs closure. It is biologically compelled to seek it, and in its absence, it will return obsessively to the unresolved thing, replaying it, analyzing it, building elaborate internal narratives around it. Zeigarnik's original research was about tasks and memory, but the application to human attraction is devastatingly precise. A man who ends conversations slightly before their natural conclusion leaves an open loop in her mind. A man who gives a moment of genuine connection and then redirects his focus creates an unresolved emotional thread that her brain will keep returning to. A man who hints at depth without fully revealing it creates a narrative she will keep elaborating internally, often building a version of him that is more compelling than anything he would have shown if he had simply laid himself bare. She is not only thinking about him, she is authoring him in her imagination. And the version she authors, built on the foundation of his genuine mystery, is often the most powerful version of him that exists. That imagined depth is the origin of the obsession that rational conversation can never create. He does not manufacture the mystery through deception. He creates it through restraint, through the discipline of leaving things beautifully incomplete. This is the essence of grounded masculine energy, being immovable, internally validated, and entirely unbothered by the shifting winds of external circumstances. A guy who panics when a text goes unanswered is entirely disconnected from his center. He bleeds neediness, and neediness is the ultimate anti-aphrodisiac in any human interaction. Conversely, a man who remains calm and focused on his own path projects an aura of absolute security. This silent strength is magnetic. And now for a piece of forbidden knowledge that no modern dating coach will state plainly because it sounds too primal, too honest, and too challenging to the comfortable fictions we prefer. Preselection is the most powerful passive attraction signal a man can possess. It is the evolutionary heuristic by which a woman's unconscious mind determines male value not solely by its own assessment, but by the assessment of other women. This is not a social construct. It is a biological inheritance from a time when a man's reproductive fitness was genuinely difficult to assess directly, and the most reliable proxy for that fitness was whether other women of discernment had already found him compelling. The research behind this is extensive and consistent. Studies in evolutionary psychology have repeatedly demonstrated that women rate men significantly more attractive after learning that other women desire them, not marginally more attractive. Significantly, the presence of female attention and approval from other women functions as a biological multiplier on a man's perceived value in a way that almost no other signal can replicate at the same speed and intensity. The practical implication of this is multi-layered. A man who has genuine friendships with women who clearly enjoy his company, who laugh with him, who choose to be around him, communicates preselection through his social environment without saying a word. A man who speaks warmly and with genuine respect about other women in his life communicates preselection through the quality of his relational world. A man who does not treat any single woman as the sole source of his social nourishment communicates abundance, and abundance is the behavioral signature of a preselected man. None of this is about making anyone jealous through manufactured scenarios. It is about genuinely building a life rich enough in genuine human connection that the signal of desirability radiates naturally. That signal is not something a man performs. It is something a full life generates as a byproduct. All of these behavioral shifts communicate directly with the subconscious mind, bypassing logical defenses completely. A woman might say she wants a guy who is always there, but her biology responds to the challenge of a man who is slightly out of reach. It is a primal instinct to value the man whose time is highly sought after by others. Now for the most forbidden piece of knowledge in this entire conversation, the one that the academic community documented with discomfort, the one that polite self-help content refuses to name directly. Researchers studying the dark triad, the psychological cluster of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, made a finding that disturbed the scientific community when it was published. Men who score higher on these traits, particularly on the subclinical versions of narcissism and Machiavellianism, consistently report significantly higher short-term mating success. The research, conducted across multiple countries and demographics, showed a reliable correlation between these dark personality traits and female attraction, particularly in younger women and in short-term mating contexts. Now, understand precisely what this finding does and does not mean. It does not mean that cruelty, manipulation, or exploitation are attractive. It does not mean that becoming a pathological narcissist is a strategy worth pursuing. What it means, when you look beneath the surface of the data, is that specific elements contained within these traits operate as powerful attraction signals in isolation. The traits in question are this: unshakable belief in one's own value, the absence of anxiety-based people-pleasing behavior, the willingness to pursue personal goals without apologizing for them, the calm comfort with moral ambiguity in social situations, the lack of desperate need for external validation. These traits, when present in a man who also possesses genuine empathy and ethical grounding, when they exist in a man who has integrated rather than been consumed by his dark nature, create the most compelling male presence possible. Not because darkness itself is attractive, but because a man who has confronted his own darkness and chosen to master it rather than suppress it carries an authenticity, a weight, a dimensionality that purely light-aspiring men simply cannot match. This is what Carl Jung meant by shadow integration. This is what Greene means when he writes about the man who holds a part of himself always in reserve. This is the science behind why the polished, always agreeable, perpetually positive man so often feels weightless to a woman's nervous system, while the man with genuine complexity, genuine edges, genuine darkness he has chosen to govern feels like gravity. If a man wants to foster genuine emotional bonding, he must let go of the urge to control the outcome of every interaction. He must become comfortable with the void, the space where nothing is happening and no text is being sent. In that quiet void, the other person's imagination begins to run wild, filling in the blanks. She starts projecting her own desires onto him, building him up in her mind. This imagined version of the man is often much more powerful than the real everyday reality. Mastering this type of psychological influence requires profound discipline and a willingness to sit with one's own anxiety. Let us look at a specific scientific reality regarding behavioral conditioning. Intermittent reinforcement creates the strongest psychological habits known to behavioral science. Skinner's original research demonstrated that variable reward schedules produce the most resistant to extinction behaviors of any conditioning pattern ever studied. A behavior reinforced sometimes, unpredictably, becomes more compulsive than a behavior reinforced every time. Think of a man who realized he was always initiating contact, always planning the dates. He decided to stop, stepping back into his own life and focusing heavily on his own work. The sudden silence disrupted her expectations completely, forcing her brain to recalibrate its baseline. She began to wonder if she had lost him entirely. By simply doing nothing, this man applied the most powerful pressure possible. He let the silence do the talking. Within days, she reached out confused, intrigued, and suddenly highly invested in regaining his attention. The tables had turned completely, not through angry words, but through the strategic application of absence. It is a testament to the fact that sometimes the absolute best action a man can take is no action at all. To pull this off, a man must possess a deep well of inner power and unshakable conviction. He cannot fake being busy. He must genuinely build a life that demands his time and focused energy. If he is just staring at his phone, waiting an hour to reply, the underlying desperate energy will eventually leak out. People can sense authenticity, and they can certainly sense a carefully constructed illusion. The goal is to actually become the man who is too deeply engaged with his purpose to worry about trivial games. Understanding the fundamental principles of human behavior is like reading the source code of reality itself. A man learns that people do not value what is given freely. They value what they have to work for. When a guy makes himself an easy target, he robs the other person of the satisfaction of the chase. He must understand that the thrill of pursuit is mutual in romantic dynamics. There is a hidden rhythm to social dynamics that most people never take the time to observe. It is an ebb and flow, a continuous cycle of advancing and retreating that keeps interactions feeling alive. A man who only advances will eventually crash into a wall of resistance and apathy. He must learn to retreat gracefully, creating a vacuum that naturally pulls the other person forward. Nature always abhors a vacuum, and someone will inevitably rush in to fill it. Here is the final forbidden layer, the deepest truth in this entire architecture. A woman's nervous system requires two specific and seemingly contradictory conditions to generate the deepest form of attraction. She must feel completely safe in his character, and she must feel slightly unsure of his complete availability. Both conditions must be present simultaneously. Either one alone is insufficient. Safety without uncertainty creates affection without obsession. Uncertainty without safety creates anxiety without genuine bonding. This is what researchers in attachment theory describe as the optimal tension point, the precise emotional position where a woman's nervous system is engaged fully, where her attention cannot drift, where her investment intensifies because the dynamic requires her active participation to sustain it. The man who achieves this is not cruel, and he is not fully available. He is warm, but not transparent. He is genuine, but not predictable. He is interested, but not orbiting. He is the lighthouse she can see clearly from a distance, but can never quite reach, because he is fixed on a shore of his own that she must approach on her own terms. That oscillation between the comfort of his character and the challenge of his complete attention, between the certainty of who he is and the uncertainty of whether she has fully won him, is the psychological architecture of genuine obsession. It cannot be manufactured. It can only be embodied by a man who has done the deepest work on himself, a man who has integrated his shadow and dissolved his covert contracts, a man who has built a life large enough that his attention is genuinely scarce, a man who understands that his darkness, governed and mastered, is not a liability, but the source of his most compelling gravity. Embarking on this journey requires a complete mindset transformation. A man must stop viewing himself as a beggar for affection. He must realize that his mere presence is a gift, and it should only be given to those who earn it. This shift from scarcity to abundance changes the way he walks, talks, and interacts with the world. He stops rushing, his voice drops, his movements become deliberate, and his eye contact becomes piercing. He embodies a quiet danger that is deeply intoxicating to anyone who crosses his path. But the transition from understanding these principles to embodying them requires something most content refuses to address directly. It requires identity-level change, not behavioral adjustment. A man who tries to apply these frameworks as techniques, strategic withdrawal practiced as a manipulation, mystery performed as an act, will always eventually collapse back into his original patterns. Because the techniques are not the man. And women can feel the difference between a man wearing the armor and a man who has become the warrior. The identity work looks like this. A man must confront, with complete honesty, the parts of himself that have been fueled by fear rather than by genuine strength. The overtexting driven by anxiety about her attention, the constant accommodation driven by terror of her disapproval, the oversharing driven by the desperate need to be fully known before she decides to leave. Each of these patterns has a fear beneath it, and each fear has a wound beneath that. The man who is willing to sit with those wounds, to understand them without performing for them, to integrate the pain they carry, rather than suppressing or dramatizing it, that man gradually stops performing and starts being. A man who has genuinely become is not thinking about response times as he moves through his day. He is genuinely occupied with his own life. He is not consciously creating mystery as he speaks. He is genuinely complex enough that mystery is the natural outcome of his presence. He is not strategically oscillating between warmth and distance. His emotional life is genuinely full enough that his attention naturally concentrates and diffuses based on what deserves it. That is the identity the forbidden frameworks are pointing toward. Not a technique to be applied, but a man to be built. For those looking to practically apply these concepts, start by auditing your digital communication habits today. Turn off the notifications on your phone and dedicate specific blocks of time to check your messages. If you receive a text, do not reply immediately. Let it sit while you finish whatever task you are doing. Focus on a hobby, read a book, or train. The goal is to naturally stretch the time between your interactions, building necessary tension. But do this only if you are genuinely occupied with something that matters to you. Otherwise, the underlying energy will bleed through. The next audit is your self-disclosure habits. For 1 week, practice saying slightly less than you want to say in conversations that feel important. Stop at the moment that feels complete, rather than continuing to add. Let the silence that follows be intentional. Notice how the quality of what came before is elevated simply by allowing it to breathe without being immediately followed by more. That restraint is the Zeigarnik Effect working in your favor. You are creating the open loop that her imagination will fill for hours after you're gone. The deepest audit is of your covert contracts. Look at the last 3 things you did for a woman you are attracted to, and ask yourself, honestly, whether each one carried an invisible expectation of romantic return. If it did, dissolve the contract. Either give freely or do not give at all, but stop giving with a hidden invoice attached. That shift alone will change the quality of your presence more immediately and more profoundly than any technique you could apply on top of it. The journey to this level of mastery is solitary. It demands that a man face his deepest insecurities head-on. He must look at the empty spaces in his life and learn to find profound peace within the heavy silence. As he implements these frameworks, he will notice an immediate, shocking shift in how people react to him. But holding on to this power requires continuous vigilance, as the old habits of the perpetually available man are always trying to return. The real test is what he does when the silence breaks, when she reaches back out, when the warmth returns, and every instinct tells him to collapse back into availability. That is the moment everything he has built is either solidified or dissolved. Hold the line, respond warmly, genuinely, but from the same centered place he maintained throughout. Let her feel that his equilibrium never actually depended on whether she reached out. That quality, the unshakable groundedness that was present before she withdrew, and remains equally present after she returns, is the final signal. It says, without words, that this man is real. that the depth she sensed was not performed, that there is more of him to discover, always more. Stop trying to decode her punctuation. Stop handing over your power in the hope that total availability will eventually be rewarded. Put the phone down. Build the interior. Integrate the shadow. Dissolve the contracts. Become genuinely, irreducibly complex, and let the mystery be the natural, undeniable emanation of a man who has done the real work. You were built for so much more than checking your phone to see if she replied. Drop into the comments right now and write, "I am taking my power back." By writing those words, you are drawing a permanent line in the sand. And I want to know how many men in this community are choosing that line today. If this video cracked something open in you, if it reached a layer most content never touches like it, share it and subscribe. Because what we go into next makes everything in this video look like the surface. To every forged brother who carries this channel forward, thank you. Because of you, more men are doing the real work, not the surface work. The deep, uncomfortable, solitary work of becoming the man whose presence speaks for itself. That is the ripple that changes everything. Keep forging, brothers.